I came home from a work trip to find a bulldozer parked on what used to be my backyard, and the HOA president smiling at me from my own porch like she'd done me a favor. She had no idea that the envelope sitting on my desk the next Monday morning had her name on it, and that I was the one who got to open it. What would you do if the woman who destroyed your home suddenly needed your signature to keep her own? The first thing Cheryl Pemberton ever said to me was that my welcome mat was the wrong color. I was still holding a moving box. My wife Danielle was inside trying to hang curtains, and our daughter Maisie, who was 6 years old and had just lost her best friend to a cross-country move, was sitting on the stairs crying into the fur of our old dog Biscuit. I had not slept in 2 days. I had driven a U-Haul through 3 states. And this woman, in her pressed khaki pants and a pearl necklace at 9 in the morning, was telling me that the mat I had bought at a hardware store in Ohio was not on the approved list. I thought she was kidding. I laughed. It was a tired laugh, the kind you give when your brain has not caught up with your ears yet. She did not laugh back. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, wrote something down, tore the page out, and handed it to me. It was a warning slip. Real paper, real ink, a real little line for my signature at the bottom. She told me her name. She told me she was the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. She told me she looked forward to helping us fit in. Then she walked back to her house across the street like she had just delivered a pizza. I stood there holding the slip. I looked down at the mat. It was brown. It said welcome. I put it back on the porch and I went inside, and I did not tell Danielle, because Danielle had cried in the truck that morning about leaving her mother, and I did not want to add one more thing to the pile. That was my first mistake. There would be others. The slips kept coming. A new one every few days, tucked under the windshield wiper of my car or taped to my front door. My garden hose was coiled the wrong way. The recycling bin had been visible from the road for more than the allowed 1 hour after pickup. Our porch light was a warmer shade of yellow than the bylaws permitted. Each one came with a small fine. $10 here. $25 there. $50 for the porch light, because apparently light temperature was a serious offense in Maple Ridge. I started a folder in my desk drawer. I labeled it HOA. I told myself I would deal with it on a weekend when I had time. I never had time. My neighbor on the right side was a retired bookkeeper named Harold Finch. He was in his 70s, thin as a broom, with a little white dog named Muriel that he walked twice a day at exactly the same time. Harold waved at me from his porch, but he never came over. One evening I was dragging the garbage bins back to the side of the house, and Harold crossed the strip of grass between our driveways and stood there for a moment, looking both ways like he was about to cross a busy street. He told me, quietly, that Cheryl had run 3 families out of my house in the last 6 years. He said one family had lost everything fighting her in court. Then he looked at Cheryl's front window, which had the curtain pulled back just an inch, and he walked back to his own porch without another word. I told Danielle that night, at the kitchen table, after Maisie had gone to bed. Danielle set down her fork and asked me if we should be worried. I told her no. I told her it was a sad, lonely woman with too much time and a clipboard. I told her I could handle it. I promised her. That was my second mistake. The next week I had to travel for work. I was a forensic financial auditor for the state, which is a long way of saying I read numbers for a living and I find out when people are lying with them. My job had sent me to a training for 3 days in the capital, 200 miles away. I kissed Danielle goodbye on Sunday night. I kissed Maisie on her forehead while she was asleep. I told Biscuit to be good. I drove away before sunrise on Monday with a thermos of coffee and a bad feeling I could not name. Danielle called me on Wednesday afternoon. Her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before. She said there was a truck in our backyard. She said a man in a vest was telling her she had to move. She said Cheryl was standing on our grass with a piece of paper. I told her to call the police. I got in my car. I drove the 200 miles back in a little over 2 hours, and I do not remember most of that drive, only the sound of my own breathing and the flat gray highway and the thought, repeating over and over, of Maisie's little oak tree. The one she had named Mr. Branches. The one with the tire swing. When I turned onto our street, the bulldozer was still running. 40 feet of our backyard was gone. The oak tree was lying on its side in the dirt. Mr. Branches. The tire swing was crushed underneath it. Maisie was sitting on our front porch in her pink pajamas with Biscuit pressed against her, and she was not crying, which was somehow worse than if she had been. Cheryl was standing by the foreman with a clipboard, laughing at something he had said. She turned when she heard my car. She smiled at me. She actually waved. I walked past her without a word. I went straight to Danielle. Danielle was in the kitchen with her hands flat on the counter, breathing like she had just finished running, and she handed me the piece of paper without looking at me. It was an easement. It said I had signed it. And the signature at the bottom of that page was not mine. Before I tell you what happened when I opened my desk at work that Monday morning, do me one favor and hit subscribe, because the moment I saw the name on that folder, I knew Cheryl had just made the biggest mistake of her entire life. Sleep was a thing that happened to other people that week. I sat at our kitchen table from 2 in the morning until the sun came up, and I read the easement paper line by line, the way I read the books I audit at work. I made a list. The signature was not mine. The notary stamp was from a county we did not live in. The date on the document was from 3 weeks before I had ever set foot in that house. The sideline language, the part about allowing a community view corridor, referred to a section of the neighborhood bylaws that had been repealed in 2019, which I found out because I spent 4 hours on the county recorder's website with Biscuit asleep on my feet. Danielle came down around 6. She made coffee. She sat across from me and looked at my notes and asked me, very calmly, what I was going to do. I told her I was going to do my job. She asked me what that meant. I told her I did not know yet. I told her I had to go to work on Monday, and I had to act like a person who had not just had his backyard eaten by a machine, and I had to wait. Waiting was the hardest part of my job, and I had gotten good at it over 15 years. Maisie would not go into the backyard. She stood at the glass door on Friday morning with her cereal bowl in her hands, and she looked out at the flat brown dirt where Mr. Branches used to be, and she asked me if trees went to heaven. I did not have an answer that was honest and kind at the same time, so I told her yes, and I hated myself for it, because I had promised her a long time ago that I would never lie to her, not even about the small things. Danielle took her to her mother's house for the weekend. I told them I needed a few days. I did not say why. I spent Saturday at the county records office. I pulled every HOA filing from Maple Ridge for the last 10 years. I paid the copy fee in cash. I drove to a print shop 2 towns over and I made 3 backup copies of everything, because I had learned a long time ago that paper disappears when powerful people want it to. I put 1 copy in a safe deposit box on Sunday morning. I put another in my car. I put the third in a file cabinet at work, in a drawer I kept locked. On Monday at 8:47 in the morning, my supervisor walked into my cubicle and dropped a manila folder on my desk. Her name was Regina. She had been doing this job for 22 years. She had seen bookkeepers steal from churches, and she had seen treasurers skim from Little League teams, and she had the kind of face that did not get surprised by anything anymore. She tapped the folder twice with 1 finger. She said, "Routine audit, new assignment, 3 years of records, anonymous tip," and walked away before I could ask a question. I opened the folder. The name on the front page was Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. The listed president was Cheryl Pemberton. I sat very still in my chair for about a full minute, and then I stood up and walked to Regina's office. I told her the truth. I told her I lived in that neighborhood. I told her the president had just demolished half of my backyard with a forged easement. I told her I could not be objective, and I told her I would understand if she pulled me off the case. Regina listened with her chin resting on her hand. When I was finished, she asked me 1 question. She asked me if I could be professional, which she said was different from being objective. She said objectivity was a myth auditors used to feel better. She said professionalism was whether I could follow the numbers wherever they went, even if they went somewhere I did not want them to go. I told her I could. She told me to take the folder. She told me to document every single interaction. And she told me, with the smallest smile I had ever seen on her face, that if I found anything worth finding, she would walk the referral to the district attorney herself. I drove home that evening with the folder on the passenger seat. I did not open it at red lights. I did not open it in the driveway. I carried it into the house and I set it on the kitchen table, and Danielle looked at it, and looked at me and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. I told her what it was. I told her what Regina had said. Danielle was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me a question I have thought about ever since. She asked me if I was going to do the right thing, or the thing that felt good. I told her I hoped those were the same thing this time. She said she hoped so too, and she did not smile when she said it. Tuesday morning, 7:15, the doorbell rang. Cheryl was standing on my porch with a ceramic platter wrapped in plastic wrap. A coffee cake, she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners, a peace offering from the board. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said the landscaping crew had used an outdated map. She said the HOA was prepared to offer us a gesture of goodwill in the amount of $500, which she called generous, and she said the word generous like she was waiting for me to thank her. Danielle came up behind me in her bathrobe. She did not say a word. She took the platter out of Cheryl's hands with both of her own, walked to the edge of the porch, and let it fall into the flower bed. The ceramic broke with a sound that was louder than it should have been. Cheryl's mouth opened. No sound came out. She looked at me, waiting for me to scold my wife, to apologize, to fix it. I just stood there. I watched her face change from confusion to something colder, and I watched her realize, just for a second, that she had misread us. She turned and walked across the street. Her heels clicked on the pavement. I closed the door. I went to my office and I opened the folder, and I started reading. And what I found in the third file, the one labeled Landscaping and Grounds, made me put down my pen and sit back in my chair for a long, long time. Because the name on the contracts was not Cheryl's. And the more I read, the more I realized that whoever had been stealing from Maple Ridge had been doing it for much, much longer than Cheryl had been president. The name on the landscaping contracts was Harold Finch. My quiet neighbor. The man who walked Muriel at 7 and 7. The man who had warned me on my second week in the house. His signature was on every invoice. His shell company, a tidy little LLC called Green Horizon Services, had been billing the Maple Ridge HOA just over $4,000 a month for 11 years. Mowing, trimming, mulching, seasonal plantings. The math on 11 years came out to more than $500,000. Nobody in Maple Ridge had ever seen a Green Horizon truck. I had checked. There was no truck. There was no crew. There was only Harold, pushing his own mower around his own front yard on Saturday mornings with Muriel watching from the porch. I did not tell Danielle that night. I lay in bed with my eyes open and I thought about Harold's thin face, the way he had looked both ways before he crossed the strip of grass between our driveways to warn me. I thought about kindness, and what it costs, and what it hides. I fell asleep around 4. I dreamed about my father, which I had not done in years. Wednesday after work, I walked over to Harold's house with a bottle of cheap bourbon in a paper bag. I did not bring the files. I wanted him comfortable. He opened the door before I knocked, like he had been expecting me, which maybe he had. He invited me in. His house smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. There was a framed photograph on the mantel of a woman with silver hair and a kind smile, and I knew without asking that she was his wife. We sat in his small living room. Muriel climbed into my lap. I poured us both a glass. I told him, plainly, what my job was and what folder was sitting on my desk. Harold did not flinch. He did not argue. He took a long sip of bourbon and he set his glass down on a coaster, and he said, "Well," he said, "I wondered how long it would take." I waited. I had learned a long time ago that you let people fill the silence themselves, because what they fill it with is always more than what they would have told you if you asked. Harold told me that his wife, whose name was Eleanor, had been diagnosed with a rare cancer 13 years ago. He told me that their insurance had not covered the treatment she needed, which was in a hospital 6 hours away. He told me that he had started skimming from the HOA with the idea of paying her back once she got better. She did not get better. She died 10 months after the diagnosis. Harold kept taking the money because, he said, he did not know how to stop. Because nobody ever checked. Because Cheryl Pemberton, who had been president for 9 of those 11 years, was so busy measuring mailboxes and writing warning slips about welcome mats that she had never once asked to see a bank statement. He told me that Cheryl was not stealing. Cheryl, he said, was just cruel, and there was a difference, and I was going to have to decide what to do with that difference. Then Harold told me something that made my coffee cup shake in my hand. He told me the reason Cheryl had bulldozed my backyard had nothing to do with a sideline. He told me that he, Harold, had been planning to sell his house. He had told Cheryl about it in confidence, over a cup of tea in her kitchen, 6 weeks before my family moved in. He had told her he was tired, and his daughter wanted him to move to Oregon to be near the grandchildren, and he was going to put his house on the market in the fall. Cheryl had listened. Cheryl had nodded. Cheryl had patted his hand. And then Cheryl had realized that a new owner in Harold's house would mean a new neighbor who might, God forbid, talk to other neighbors, and who might notice that Maple Ridge had been paying a ghost landscaping company for more than a decade. So Cheryl had picked a different target. She had picked us. The new family. The youngest couple on the block. The one with the tired husband and the scared wife and the little girl who cried about her tree. Cheryl had run us off 3 families worth of playbooks, hoping we would crack fast and list the house by Christmas, before anyone thought to look at the books. The bulldozer had not been punishment. It had been bait. And I had nearly taken it. I walked home through the dark. The street lamps in Maple Ridge were on timers, and they all clicked off at 11, and I stood in the middle of our flat brown backyard where Mr. Branches used to be, and I looked up at a sky I had never been able to see before because of the tree. Stars. A lot of them. I had not realized how many. Danielle was on the porch in her robe with a cup of tea. She asked me if I was okay. I told her I did not know. I told her I had been wrong about who the worst person in this neighborhood was, and I had been wrong about who the second worst person was, and I told her everything Harold had said. She listened all the way through. When I was done, she reached out and took my hand, and she said something that I have thought about a lot since then. She said, he was drowning when he started, and he kept swimming long after the shore was in sight, and that was the part he would have to answer for. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. I glanced at it. An unknown number. A single text. 7 words. I opened it, and I read it, and then I read it again, because I wanted to make sure I was not imagining what Cheryl Pemberton had just written to the man whose backyard she had destroyed 3 weeks earlier. The message said, "We need to talk, your office tomorrow." No please. No name. No explanation. I set my phone down on the porch railing and I watched it like it was a spider that might move. Danielle read it over my shoulder. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was going to let her come. I told her I was going to sit across from her at my own desk, in my own office, and I was going to let her tell me whatever she had come to say. Danielle asked me if that was safe. I told her it was not about safety anymore. It was about evidence. I did not sleep that night. Not really. I got to the office at 6:45 in the morning. I tested my phone's voice recorder 3 times on the drive-in, speaking the date and the time out loud into it like I was leaving a voicemail for my future self. I wrote an email to Regina at 6:52 telling her that Cheryl was coming in. I copied the district attorney's liaison, a woman named Vanessa who I had worked with twice before on small municipal cases. I kept my door open. I started the voice recorder at 9:58. Cheryl walked in at 10 sharp. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit. Her hair was done. She had lipstick on. She was carrying a leather portfolio with her initials stamped on the corner in gold, which I noticed because one of the little details of my job is that people who are about to confess something almost always dress for the occasion. She sat down across from my desk. She crossed her legs. She smiled the tight smile that did not reach her eyes, and she told me she knew I had been assigned to audit Maple Ridge. I did not answer. I folded my hands on my desk. I let her talk. This is a thing I had learned from Regina a long time ago. Guilty people, she told me once, cannot stand silence. Silence is the most expensive thing in the world to them. They will spend anything to fill it. Cheryl filled it. She told me that she had been thinking, and she thought maybe we had gotten off on the wrong foot. She told me that the board had reviewed my situation, and that they were prepared to offer us a full landscaping restoration. Mature trees. A new fence. A new bench. $15,000 of work, she said, all of it done within 30 days. She told me she would write a personal apology letter and frame it, if I wanted. She said if, and she said frame it, like she was offering me a vacation. I asked her, quietly, what the board wanted in return. She paused. She looked at the door, which was open. I did not close it. She looked back at me. She told me that the audit contained some contracts that were, in her words, outdated. She said the board would appreciate it if those contracts could be set aside from the main review. She said it in a voice that had been rehearsed. I asked her which contracts. She said the landscaping contracts. I asked her why. Cheryl Pemberton, who had been president of the Maple Ridge HOA for 9 years, who had bullied 3 families out of my house, who had never in her life been forced to explain herself to a man half her age in a cubicle office, told me the truth. She told me that Harold gave her a cut. $1,200 a month. Cash in an envelope, every first Tuesday. She told me it was not about the money. She said that, actually, out loud, while my phone was recording. She said it paid for her country club membership. She said it paid for quarterly trips to Sedona with her sister. She said her husband had left her for a dental hygienist 6 years ago, and that the country club and the Sedona trips were the only things that made retirement bearable, and that nobody understood what it was like to be a woman of her age and her standing with nothing to do all day. I asked her what she thought would happen to Harold if I set the contracts aside. She told me that was my problem. She said it with a small shrug, like she was discussing a weather forecast. I asked her what she thought would happen to my backyard if I did not set the contracts aside. She smiled. She told me that was my problem too. I walked her out of the office. I thanked her for coming. I stood in the lobby and I watched her get into her white SUV and drive away, and then I walked back to my desk and I closed the door and I called Regina. I played her the recording. When it was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in her flat Midwestern voice, well? She said, well. She told me to email the file to Vanessa. She told me to go home and hug my wife and daughter. She told me she would take it from there. The police came for Cheryl 11 days later. It was 7 in the morning. Half the neighborhood stood on their porches in bathrobes. Danielle and I watched from our front window with Maisie asleep upstairs. Cheryl came out of her house in the same pantsuit she had worn to my office, which somehow made it worse. She did not cry. She did not fight. She walked to the cruiser with her head up. She looked across the street, just once, at our house, and I could not read her face from that far away, but I did not need to. The clipboards and the laminated warning slips and the welcome mat rule book were all going into a cardboard box on the curb. Harold turned himself in that same afternoon. He called me first. He told me Muriel needed to go somewhere safe, and his daughter could not fly in from Oregon for 2 days. He asked if Maisie might want a dog. I told him I would come get her in an hour. Maisie named her Miss Muffin by dinner time. Biscuit, who was 13 and tired, let the smaller dog sleep in his bed without complaint. Some things fix themselves while you are not looking. But 3 weeks after the arrests, after the news vans had left, and the new HOA board had been sworn in, and the reserve fund had been frozen by the court, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in Phoenix. I did not recognize the name. I opened it at the kitchen table while Danielle watched. I read it twice. And what was inside that envelope made me sit back in my chair, because everything I thought I had understood about Cheryl Pemberton had just been rearranged. The letter was from a lawyer representing Cheryl's daughter. Her name was Elaine. She lived in Phoenix. She had not spoken to her mother in 9 years. The letter was not a lawsuit. It was a request. Elaine wanted to meet with me, or at least speak with me on the phone. She said she had information the district attorney did not have. She said she had been watching the news coverage from Arizona, and she needed, for her own sake, to tell someone the truth before the sentencing hearing. She left a phone number. She left nothing else. I did not call right away. I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town that Saturday morning, by myself, and I walked along the rows of stones until I found the one I was looking for. Eleanor Finch. 1954 to 2013. Beloved wife. There were fresh flowers on the grave. I did not know how long they had been there, or who had brought them. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets, and I thought about Harold's small living room, and the framed photograph on the mantel, and I thought about what it meant to lose someone so completely that you never stopped paying for it. Then I drove home and I called Elaine. Her voice on the phone was soft and tired. She sounded like someone who had been holding a heavy thing for a long time and was not sure how to set it down. She thanked me for calling. She told me she had not spoken to her mother in 9 years, not because of a fight, but because something had gone wrong with her mother slowly, over about 2 years, a long time before I had ever moved to Maple Ridge. She asked me if I had a few minutes. I told her I had all the time she needed. Danielle sat down on the couch next to me and put her hand on my knee. Elaine told me that when she was a girl, her mother had been a middle school art teacher. Her mother had volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. Her mother had made Halloween costumes by hand for every kid on the block, including kids whose parents could not afford store-bought costumes. Her mother had been, Elaine said, kind. She said the word kind like it hurt her to say it. What changed, Elaine told me, was not the divorce. The divorce came later. What changed was a diagnosis. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset frontal lobe dementia at 58. The disease did not steal her memory first. It stole her empathy. It stole her impulse control. It stole, in a way that no MRI could ever fully show, her ability to feel other people as fully human. Elaine had watched it happen over about 18 months. Her mother had refused to tell anyone. Her mother had refused treatment, which was mostly experimental anyway. Her mother had become HOA president the same spring the diagnosis came down, and had poured every ounce of her dissolving self into controlling a neighborhood because she could no longer control her own brain. Elaine said that was not an excuse. She said it twice, actually, and I believed her. She said her mother had done real things to real people, and those things were real, and the people were real, and nothing she was telling me erased any of it. But she said she thought I should know. She said she thought the judge should know. She said she had tried, for 9 years, to do the hard work of loving her mother from a distance, and she was not ready to lose the last piece of her to a prison that would not understand what was happening inside her head. I asked Elaine if she would testify. She told me she could not. She told me her father had asked her to stay out of it, and her father had been the person who loved her mother longest and hardest and was still, somehow, paying for it. She said she would sign an affidavit. She said she would send me the medical records. She said the rest was up to me. I talked to Danielle for a long time that night. We sat on the porch until almost midnight, with Biscuit on my feet and Miss Muffin on Danielle's lap, and we did not try to rush each other toward an answer. Danielle asked me what Maisie would want me to do. That was the question that finally cracked me open, because Maisie was 6, and Maisie did not understand dementia, but Maisie understood, already, the difference between getting even and being good. She asked me about it in small ways all the time. Was it okay to step on a spider? Was it okay to tell a kid at school that his drawing was bad? Was it okay to be angry at Biscuit for chewing her shoe? She was watching me. She was always watching me. I called Vanessa at the district attorney's office on Monday morning. I told her about Elaine. I told her about the affidavit. I asked her if there was a way to put it in front of the judge without requiring Elaine to fly in. Vanessa was quiet. She told me that was not standard procedure. She told me that defendants hired their own lawyers to gather this kind of material, and that prosecutors did not, as a rule, help build the mitigation file of the person they had charged. Then she was quiet again. Then she said, "But sometimes we put truth in front of judges and let them decide what to do with it." She told me to send her the records. She told me she would see what she could do. I walked to Harold's house that evening. His lights were still on. He had been out on bond, waiting for his own sentencing, keeping to himself, taking his meals on the back porch where the neighbors could not see him. I told him what I was thinking of doing for Cheryl. I asked him if he thought she deserved it. Harold was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I did not expect. He said Eleanor, his wife, had been a kinder person than he was, and Eleanor would have wanted him to say yes. He told me she had volunteered at a memory care unit for 2 years before she got sick herself. He told me that Eleanor, if she were still alive, would have been the first person on Cheryl Pemberton's porch with a casserole the day the diagnosis came down. I asked him why he had never told Cheryl that. He looked at me for a long moment. He said because I did not know. He said I thought she was just mean. I walked home in the dark. The street lamps clicked off at 11. I stood in the middle of the backyard where Mr. Branches used to be. I looked up at the stars. And I knew, without having to decide it, what I was going to do. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in late October. I drove downtown in a suit I had not worn since my sister's wedding. Danielle came with me. Maisie stayed with her grandmother. The courthouse steps were cold, and the sky was that hard blue that only happens in autumn. Vanessa met us in the hallway. She nodded at me. She did not smile. Cheryl was brought in through a side door in jail clothes. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was not done. She looked at me once, across the room, and her eyes were empty in a way I had not seen before. Not cruel. Not angry. Just empty. Like the person who had stood on my porch with a clipboard had been a costume, and the real Cheryl underneath had forgotten how to wear it. The prosecution laid it all out. The recording. The forged easement. 11 years of fraud built into a case so clean that Cheryl's lawyer did not argue with the math. When the judge asked for victim impact statements, I walked to the podium. I told him about Mr. Branches. About the tire swing. About Maisie on the porch in her pink pajamas, and Danielle in the kitchen with her breath coming too fast. Then I told him the other thing. I told him about Elaine. I told him about the diagnosis. I put the affidavit on the podium. I told the judge I was not asking for leniency. I was asking for him to know. What happened to my family should be answered for. What was happening inside Cheryl's head should also be answered for. I trusted him to know the difference, because I did not. Cheryl was crying, quietly, the kind of crying where the shoulders move but no sound comes out. The room was very quiet. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in a minimum security facility with a medical wing. Harold got 3 years, served near his daughter in Oregon. Danielle ran for the new HOA board on a write-in campaign and won. She rewrote the bylaws down to 16 pages. The reserve fund was replenished from seized assets, and the board voted unanimously on the project. We replanted the oak tree on a Saturday in April. The whole neighborhood came. Danielle held the sapling steady. I shoveled the dirt. Maisie poured the first cup of water from her little plastic can and said a few words over it that she did not share with any of us. I did not ask. Cheryl's condition worsened inside. Elaine eventually moved her to Phoenix. Harold sends a Christmas card every year and never asks about her. I never bring her up. There is a small plaque at the base of the new oak. It reads, "For Mr. Branches, and for what grows back." Danielle wrote those words. I had a daughter to raise. I had a tree to water. And I had a life that was, in the end, still mine.